Okay, Rock's got a story.
Yeah, I got a story, and I try to avoid most of my joining 66 and all that stuff. But I had 2 tours in Southeast Asia, and one tour happened to be in Thailand. And it's my second tour, and I was attached with WWII, part of the CIA covert war in Laos, but I was a combat photographer, and I recorded it. I mean, that was my job. The base I was stationed, one of them, TDY, to Nakhon, which is located right off the Mekong from Phuket, Laos. It wasn't too far from there. It was a stone throw. A lot of retiree Viet Minh lived out there. And so we were surrounded by communists. And it was a remote base. But this isn't the story. The story is really the happy part. What I really enjoyed was a time when Christmas was coming, actually October, I believe it was, when the officers and airmen, we got together. There was an orphanage located 50 miles west of us. It was called Tyre. St. Joseph's was a school, and about 1,300 orphans were there. Luckily, I got with one of the motor pool guys, and he was working there, and he got me to this Tyre, and I was really amazed how much the Catholics, actually the Catholic church was there. Father Kai, who was he was a saint. He had a prayer book in one hand, and his other hand he had a child. And he was just an inspiration for me. I learned a lot by just being around him. Well, in October of the base, we got back and we started a campaign called Operation Tyre, where we tried to get Christmas to the kids. And we started we got about $5,000 from everybody. All outfits were trying to outdo each other. But this one precious part comes in when the kids got snow from Colorado with a Colorado spruce on top, delivered to Nakhon, and then 50 miles to the orphanage, and it was dumped. And of course, it came up. The kids were just I mean, they didn't know what it was, and they just had a ball. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how they did it. But during this time, we collected something like 50, 60 4x4 feet boxes of all kinds of stuff, from toothpaste to brushes and combs. And it was loaded, and they were new. Each one was wrapped. I don't know how they did it, whoever did it. But that was part of the gifts that we gave to the orphanage. And as it was interesting, the orphanage course, that was really a neat thing to see that snow in the kids' faces. But after that, of course, off of we had what was it? One of our Jolly Greens supers came in, and with Santa Claus, of course, that aced the snow, and he brought all kinds of gifts and bags. So these kids had bags, and there was a lot of Catholic nuns there and so forth giving out in these bags. And probably one of the most joyful, actually the Archbishop from Bangkok was there. He traveled 17 hours by car, and went back 17. It was really a big thing. The older girls in the orphanage, they did dances for us, and it was a great party. It was something so different than from what I was experiencing, of course, in my duty. And it led to many things. Me teaching English, and that's another story. I'll tell that later. But to the kids. But one of the most thing, it was the thing that I saw in their faces. These kids, they had the true story of Christmas with all their peace, and I can see it now, and I still do. It gives me a tickle every time Christmas comes around, because I remember it. I remember my time there. But actually, I don't know how else to say it, but very fortunate to be at that time and experiencing something that I would probably never have if I wasn't in the Air Force and my job. Actually, it's part of it. Yeah, Laos, it's another story. Yes.
How many children were there?
About 1,300. Yeah, there was a lot. Yeah, I was stationed at a base that was actually, we had a front. Since it was a covert war in Laos, it wasn't supposed to be broadcast. We were on a remote base. To tell you how close Nikampanan was, they call it Naked Fanny, the officers, the flyers, they called it NKP. And you're familiar with it? Okay. Yeah, NKP. I mean, I had an unauthorized ride in one of the A1Es, and that's a story too. Yeah, and luckily there's another story too. Had one of the cluster bombs blew up probably about 20 feet from me, and I lived. And that's a story too. Why I'm here, I have no idea. But then again, I wasn't hurt. I was really thrown though. Anyway, I'll give you an example. NKP was approximately like San Francisco to San Luis Obispo to Hanoi. That's how close we were. And it's quite interesting talking with the Viet Minh retired. They didn't want anything to do with the Viet Cong, or, excuse me, the North Vietnam.
What do you mean they were retired?
Well, they escaped. They left. They left North Vietnam because they didn't want to be. They had their families there. I mean, they had.
They in the military?
Well, the Viet Minh were the
50s.
predecessors of the Viet Cong.
World War II against the Japanese.
Oh,
Yeah, and they also their early part.
what do you do with this?
Well,
They were older.
they were old. Yeah, they were old, or they were old. They told me their philosophy. I didn't know. I knew some of these people because I come from a restaurant family, and I made friends with one of them. I didn't even know he was a Min at one time, but very nice guy. And also, he told me his philosophy with the war. I learned too about. I worked with the Ravens. I don't know if you've been familiar with the Ravens.
Bird dog pilots. I got the book on.
Yeah, they're more than that though. We had 110, 115 Lima sites, and a lot of things. There's a base Long Chang that looked like Chicago O'Hare. It was so busy in aircraft, right by the jar of planes. I don't know if you're familiar. Plane of jars, yeah. Yeah, those are stories and stories and stories. I'm writing my memoirs now. I have about 5,000 pages on it, but it's, it still comes and comes. But this story of the kids was really delightful, and I still have friends. I have one friend still in Thailand that I still communicate with. One of the orphans. He's old. He has 5 kids and. Kind of nice. Always come on to Thailand. One of these days I'm going to do that. Get a buys and so forth. So I thank you very much. Yes.
There's so many orphans.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Okay, I can bring up this. There's another story. There was a group of people from the northern, in the Karsk area. If you're familiar with Karsk, the mountains in Laos. Very rugged, right? We were told when I did a 17 mission job with the pararescue to do a documentary on them. It took 17 missions, and it was a really experience for me. Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating. But getting back to this whole thing, there was a group called they called them the Male, but they hated the name Male because they were hillbillies to the Chinese and the North Vietnamese. They were kicked out of China, kicked out of Vietnam, and they settled in the mountain range of Laos. It's quite interesting. I learned to be very loving people, very good people, fierce fighters, very fierce fighters. They took what do you call it? Missions like an aircraft. They flew in. What was it?
Yeah, but Rock, why are the kids?
Kids, okay, the kids are the orphans. They are the orphans from the Mayo, or I should say, they call them the.
And what caused the high number of male orphans? Were the male fighters? Were they
Yes.
killed and so they left their kids?
Yes,
And the
a lot of them they're displaced. Villages after villages. They had a very good. Matter of fact, they were great hand grenade throwers. I tell you, this is very true.
You're still neglecting to answer the question.
No, these are the families, family kids that were displaced. They're called the Hmong. The Hmong.
The Hmong and Mao were both tribal orientations.
Right.
For
There's-
the generic term Montagnard, was it not?
Yes. Well, Montagnard was mostly in South Vietnam. You probably came across.
Well, no, Montagnard is kind of a slang or a general
Okay.
grouping
For
for,
mountain people.
Mountain people.
yeah.
But the Mao
No,
was.
it couldn't be, like in Vietnam, there's like 17
Yeah.
subgroups of these Montagnards and that. And so, but it can extend to the mountains of Laos or,
Yes.
Thailand.
Yeah, that's very true. They hated the word Mao. They disdained it. They said, they were the Hmong, and that's what they're really proud of that. Vang Pao was the man who organized the armies there, and I had opportunity to be with him several times in photography.
Interestingly enough, maybe this fills in some gaps on your question. End of World War II, there were 30,000 Japanese troops left in Vietnam with no way to get home because we'd sunk all their ships. So they started intermarrying, or so to speak, living with Vietnamese. And then the British had this thought, the French fleet is shot from World War II, but our fleet's still functioning. We're going to go back and claim Vietnam in hopes that then the French, when they get their feet under themselves, with enough of their legionnaires, will come back and help us take back India. Little quid pro quo. So the British land, and they discover there are 30,000 Japanese who are seasoned troops. And about that same time, the Viet Minh, under General Giap and so forth, start their push from the north down to take over all of Vietnam actually not for the communists at that time. It was for the Vietnamese, because they'd been had by the Chinese, they'd been had by the French, they'd been had by the Japanese. They just wanted to be their own country. And the mountain people didn't want anything to do with Vietnamese or Laotians or anybody else, because they were like Native Americans. We're our own tribe. We don't want Washington to tell us what to do. We don't want to kowtow to the Vietnamization program, where they had to come into the settlements at night to be defended or be considered the enemy, where their sons could be chained to a machine gun, their wives could be raped, their fathers could be beasts of burden, etc. So at any rate, only through a lot of effort and proof and building of trust did the Montagnards, generically, ever become very, very loyal to the American cause in Vietnam. Initially, they didn't want anything to do with it. When you became, I think one of the symbols was, when you became trusted by the Viet Minh, the mountain people, they would give you a bracelet made out of the hair of an elephant.
So who was their enemy, the mountain people?
Everybody. They just wanted to be left alone. Initially.
And then the bracelets changed over to kind of a bronze metal thing later on, is what I would.
It's like we're wedded to you as an
Listen
ally.
to this, I know we're running over,
Yeah, we are running.
you can stop me, but when I was hiding out in Paris, being an artist, I had two friends at the Sorbonne, among many friends, international city, right? All these kids from all over the world were going to school there. I had German friends, Polish friends, all over the place, South America, Argentina. But two of my friends were Vietnamese. And one of them was I can't remember their names. One was a boy, one was a girl. The boy was from South Vietnam. His girlfriend was from North Vietnam. Okay? And they invited me to the Tet celebration 2 years before Tet in Vietnam. This was January 66. And they invited me to the Tet celebration. It was called the North Vietnamese Ball, celebrating Tet at the Sorbonne. And this Vietnamese kid came up to me and he said, "What are you doing in Vietnam?" And I looked at him and I said,
No. He said, "What are you doing here?"
"No." He said,
what
"What
is
are you
America
doing?"
doing in
He said, "What are you doing in Vietnam?" Meaning our country, not me. Okay?
Yeah.
You stand corrected. Okay? I said, because I remember this, and I looked at the guy that asked the kid. He wasn't any older than me, 22 or something. And I looked at him and I said, "I'm not in Vietnam. I'm here with you, for the same reason you're here. You know, you're fortunate to have a parents that'll get you out of the country, so you don't have to fight and kill each other, right?" But the interesting comment to me was, he said, when I responded to him, he said, it's none of your business. It's a civil war between us. And I'm telling you, and my dad was a World War II veteran that said, "We got to stop the Iron Curtain." He was a Navy career officer, and he'd always told me as a kid growing up, we're fighting communism. And he's probably right, too. I can't disagree with that. But my attitude was, this is the wrong place to be having a war with the Asian. We've been warned about that how many times, you know? And I looked at this guy and I said, "I'm here with you for the same reason you're here, I don't want any part of this war."
You know, I have to add to that too. You know, when I talked with these Viet Minh people, actually they weren't considered themselves. They called themselves. They called it the American War. They never called it the Vietnam War. Yeah, and the major thing, what I was told, is very much when I saw McNamara and his discord with the President Johnson, and if you listen or watch or what he said, and this Viet Minh said the same thing, is that they were thinking of us, North Vietnam was thinking of us as nothing more than an imperial, a land grabber. That was it. Land grabbing. It was not, they didn't think of us as, and we thought of them as a domino theory, of course, Johnson and so forth. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of philosophy behind the whole thing. Even Kennedy wasn't going to be going into, he was more concerned with Laos, by the way. But then again, that's CIA stuff, and I really am trying to figure that out, what the heck I experience.
Well, the industrial complex was trying to
Yeah,
weapons.
exactly. Yeah, the French, for example, you know, at the end of the Japanese, Truman and the group could have gave them their country. We wouldn't have had this whole problem.
Two things we're missing here.
How many of you know why we went into Vietnam in the first place? One simple answer. For the very same reason that if Germany were attacked today by Russia, we would go in to help Germany. NATO, SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. We were a willing participant and we said any of us that are invaded, all the others come in to assist them. So that's why we went into Vietnam. You were associated with the CIA. World War II. Where was the predecessor? What was the predecessor to the CIA? The Office of Strategic Services. It was in North Vietnam. It was helping Ho Chi Minh against the Japanese. Ho Chi Minh was very American-oriented. In fact, even used the majority of the Declaration of Independence in the Vietnamese. But when the United States at the end of World War II had to make up its mind, are we going to back France, who was our ally in Europe, or are we going to back North Vietnamese? We had to side with France. Or we chose to side with France because they were an ally, part of the Big Four in Berlin, et cetera. You know, they got their ass kicked, we know that, but still they were an ally. So when the Japanese were discovered there and eventually thrown out, and the North Vietnamese took advantage of that vacuum to move south with a Viet Minh who had retired by the time Vietnam came about. You know, we're going from 54 to, when were you there? Okay, 24 years later. I mean, the guys that fought as 24-year-olds were now 48. They were over the hill. They weren't around it. Oh, there were a few. General Japp was still there, and there were some officers and probably some senior NCOs, but the majority were not. And you know, we were in Vietnam for one reason. We chose to be a member and a signatory to CETO. And once that was attacked, it was no longer a civil war as far as we were concerned. Yeah, we were an outsider looking in, but we were part of a group that was agreed to support any country of those CETO members that was attacked.
Let me ask you about, what do you think about Kennedy if he would have lived, if he'd been there?
He's the one that got us into it. Oh, you mean Laos? Well,
Well, that
I-
really started with
I-
Eisenhower, though,
He said
sending people
advisors.
over as advisors.
I
That was 1958.
I went through flight school with a guy who had been a special Green Beret before. Now, I can understand going from a Green Beret to a pilot, but where was he as a Green Beret? He was in civilian clothes in Laos, working directly for Vang Pao. Operation White Star. You can read about it. One of the members of that group's wife found out that if her husband were to die in Laos or anywhere in civilian clothes, she would not get $10,000.
You want to hear something about that? I
Sir.
had to wear civilian clothes, and I didn't have I had my hat, regular hat. But I said, what happens if I'm captured and so forth? They said, well, just put your hat on, get your uniform. You know, they 600 of our POWs, all of them are killed. 600. No, they're because of Geneva Convention, and we're not supposed to be there. It really ticked me off because of the fact of hearing.
600 of our POWs were eliminated. How do we know that? Because we know they were captured and they didn't come home. And they didn't come home.
Came home.
You talking about Americans?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Ravens were decimated. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ravens. Oh, they were sheep dipped. I wasn't sheep. So I mean, they were considered CIA or with Air America, Continental. It was-
Can I close with the
Oh,
the
yeah,
story?
let's do
Because
that.
we,
Go ahead.
because we got into a history lesson
Yeah, I'm
here,
sorry.
and,
Yeah.
But it was quite interesting, I have to admit.